She was just the cleaning woman, silent, invisible, forgotten in the corners of a billionaire's world. He was powerful, feared, and one signature away from losing everything. Camille Dawson never imagined correcting a simple spreadsheet would lead to a fake engagement, a public lie, and a contract worth more than money. But behind the rehearsed smiles and staged kisses, something real begins to grow, until a secret is revealed and everything threatens to fall apart. What would you do if pretending to love someone made you fall for them for real? Stay with us. This is not just a love story. It's a story about dignity, courage, and the unexpected ways two broken lives can change forever. Camille Dawson had wiped this same floor over 100 times, but today her focus was split between the lemon-scented solution in her spray bottle and the open laptop abandoned on the massive oak desk just a few feet away. It wasn't her business. She knew that. But when you spent your life cleaning the remnants of someone else's brilliance, some of it clung to you. The spreadsheet glared at her, taunting with numbers that didn't add up. Camille's brain, trained in late-night economic theory podcasts and dusty textbooks bought with waitressing tips, recognized the problem immediately. Depreciation values were misaligned. Whoever had entered them had mixed fiscal years, throwing the balance sheets off by hundreds of thousands. It wasn't just a mistake, it was negligent. She hesitated only for a second. Then, glancing around, she crawled toward the desk on her knees, fingers damp from the rag, heart thudding, not from fear of being caught, but from the pull of compulsion. Numbers begged to be made right. She adjusted the formulas, added a comment in the margins, anonymously out of instinct, and saved the file under a duplicate name. She was already backing away toward her mop when she heard the unmistakable click of leather shoes on the marble behind her. Dante Valente hadn't spoken to Camille more than 5 times in 2 years, and none of those interactions had included her name. She was efficient, invisible, and consistent, exactly how he liked his staff, which made it all the more jarring to find her leaning over his laptop, typing with the kind of quick confidence reserved for his junior analysts. He'd forgotten the spreadsheet open. He rarely made that mistake. But what caught him wasn't her intrusion. It was the formula she had edited. He saw it immediately. She'd not only caught the error, she'd corrected it without altering the surrounding data, a skill even his CFO had botched last quarter. "Who taught you that?" he asked, his voice low and even. Camille froze, the color draining from her face. She turned slowly, standing upright, rag still clutched in one hand. "My father," she said after a beat. "He was a CPA. He made me do his taxes for practice when I was 12. Dante's gaze narrowed slightly. "Before he passed," she added, clearing her throat. "I'm sorry, Mr. Valente. I wasn't trying to pry. I saw the error and couldn't ignore it." There was no fear in her eyes, only something else, pride maybe, buried under apology. That, he thought, was interesting. He walked past her and sat at the desk, pulling the laptop closer. For the next minute, neither of them spoke. Camille considered fleeing but remained planted. It wasn't just her job at risk. It was the dignity she carried like armor. Dante studied the updated sheet, brows lowering as he followed her logic. Every adjustment made sense. No shortcuts, no overcompensation, just precision. "What's your background?" he asked, not looking up. "I was 2 semesters into a finance degree," she replied, hands now folded stiffly in front of her. "Dropped out when my mum got sick. Couldn't keep the schedule, so I cleaned houses instead." Dante closed the laptop gently. "Have you ever falsified credentials or lied to gain access to information in this house?" She blinked. "No, sir." His eyes met hers, evaluating, weighing. "Then I'll assume this was a one-time breach, and I'll let it slide." Camille's shoulders relaxed slightly, but only for a second. "However," he added, "I need someone who sees what others miss, someone discreet." She stared at him, not fully following. "Do you have plans this weekend?" he asked flatly. Sir? Because I'm going to need a fiancée, temporarily. The words hung between them like an open wound neither wanted to acknowledge. Camille's brows pulled together in quiet disbelief. She waited for the punchline, but Dante didn't do jokes. I'm not following, she said slowly. You're asking me to pretend to be my fiancé? Yes, he said, almost bored. 3 weeks, public appearances, one event in the Hamptons. In exchange, I'll fund the remainder of your degree, fully, and you'll receive a discretionary bonus. He named a number. It made her stomach twist. That kind of money wasn't just rent and tuition, it was freedom. Camille shook her head slightly. You don't even know me. I know you're invisible when you want to be, he said. You're precise. And no one would suspect it's an arrangement, which is exactly what I need. Camille's mouth opened, then closed. Why? She finally asked. Why me? Dante leaned back in his chair. Because I don't have time to find someone else. And because my grandmother's lawyers will freeze all Valente assets if I don't appear to be emotionally stabilized by month's end. She believes a man without a partner can't be trusted with a company. Camille laughed once, dry and small. That's wildly outdated. She's also wildly rich, he replied. For a long moment, Camille said nothing. She stared at the floor, then at the closed laptop, then at her own reflection in the polished wood of the desk. She could walk away, go back to her mop and her late-night classes and her mother's mounting medical bills. Or she could say yes, not because she trusted him, but because it was the first offer in a long time that felt like it came from a place of recognition. Not pity, not charity, recognition. Still, she wasn't stupid. I have conditions, she said finally. No kissing, no touching, nothing romantic, just appearances. Dante didn't hesitate. Fine. And I want everything in writing, naturally. And if this goes sideways, I want the freedom to walk away without consequences. You'll have it. He extended his hand across the desk. Camille looked at it for a moment before taking it. His grip was firm, impersonal, a transaction. She nodded once. Okay, she said, deal. As Camille stepped back from the desk, she felt a strange heat rising through her chest, not attraction, not excitement. Something quieter, something like the trembling balance between risk and survival. Dante opened his laptop again, typing quickly. My assistant will reach out this afternoon with details, measurements, press materials. I'll need a short biography, preferably clean. Camille blinked. Press? Yes, he replied. You're about to be seen. Get used to it. She nodded slowly. As she turned toward her cleaning cart, still half frozen, she didn't notice the way Dante glanced at her once more. Unreadable. She didn't see how his fingers paused over the keyboard, and she didn't yet understand what had just been set in motion. Camille Dawson, the girl who once blended into the corners of rooms, had just stepped into the center of a very different kind of stage. And somewhere deep inside the man at the desk, beneath layers of ice and inheritance, a sliver of intrigue had begun to form. He had seen something valuable, something he hadn't expected to find kneeling in front of marble. Camille sat across from Dante in his study, still wearing her cleaning uniform, though her apron now rested on the arm of the chair like a discarded identity. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was loaded, measured, the kind that felt like terms being weighed without being spoken. The folder on the table was thick, professionally bound, and far more intimidating than she expected. Dante gestured toward it with the same disinterest he might offer to a quarterly report. The agreement, he said. Standard clauses, non-disclosure, duration, termination terms. You'll find everything clearly outlined. Camille didn't move. And the part about, she paused, unsure how to phrase it, physical expectations? Dante's mouth twitched, just barely. Page 6, Section 9. No romantic contact required. No public displays unless necessary. Necessary, she echoed. Charity galas, fundraisers, photo ops. Camille exhaled. Right. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the document. He watched silently as her eyes scanned the dense legalese. There was no warmth in his gaze, only calculation. When she reached the signature page, her pen hovered. "This feels like selling something I didn't know was for sale," she muttered. "You're not selling anything," he replied coolly. "You're borrowing power." She signed, slowly, deliberately. Her name looked strange next to his. Camille Dawson and Dante Alessandro Valente. Ink on paper that would redefine the next 3 weeks of her life. When she looked up, his expression hadn't changed. He took the contract, closed the folder, and stood as if they'd just concluded a board meeting. "My assistant will arrange a wardrobe fitting this afternoon," he said, "and a crash course on the Valente family tree. You'll need to memorize names." Camille blinked. "You've done this before." "Nah, I've handled high-risk negotiations before," he replied. "This is no different." She stood, suddenly feeling smaller than ever. "You make it sound so transactional." "It is," Dante said, stepping around the desk, not quite looking at her. "This isn't a romance novel, Miss Dawson. It's a partnership, temporary, clear start, clear end." She nodded once. But even as she walked to the door, she could feel his eyes on her again. Not as a boss, not as a billionaire, but as a man trying to figure out the variable he hadn't accounted for. Camille had no idea what she'd just stepped into, but the weight of it pressed against her ribs like the edge of something breakable. The next few hours were a blur. She was measured by tailors who barely looked her in the eye, handed swatches of fabric, shoes with impossible heels, and perfumes that smelled like money and memory. A stylist hovered around her like she was clay to be molded. Lip color, hair suggestions, posture corrections. "You'll be attending the Valente Foundation Gala next week," the woman said, adjusting Camille's chin. "Photos will circulate. Eyes will be on you." Camille kept nodding, numb. They spoke about her as if she were a product, a prop to enhance Dante's image. But what stung the most was how easy it was to erase who she was, to scrub Camille the cleaner and polish her into Camille the fiancée. The only one who didn't treat her like a doll was Dante, and somehow that unsettled her more. He didn't flatter her, didn't compliment the dresses, didn't even look twice when she tried on the first engagement ring option. "Too much sparkle," he murmured, almost to himself. She'd never pick that. She, not Camille, as if he were constructing a woman that didn't exist and had no intention of seeing the real one standing in front of him. Later, alone in the guest suite assigned to her temporarily, Camille stared at herself in the mirror, her reflection unrecognizable. The dress was designer, the earrings borrowed from some vault, but her eyes were still her own, and they were afraid. Not of Dante, not even of being exposed, but of losing herself in something that had started as performance and was beginning to feel dangerously close to exposure. Emotional exposure. She remembered how his gaze had lingered when she'd asked about romantic boundaries. How he'd hesitated, not because he wanted to touch her, but because he didn't know if he could promise he wouldn't. Camille sat on the edge of the bed and removed the heels one by one. Every gesture, every movement was rehearsed now. And yet, the one thing she hadn't rehearsed for was the weight of being seen, not as staff, not as scenery, but as a variable in someone else's legacy. Somewhere deep in her gut, Camille knew this contract was not porcelain because it was fragile. It was porcelain because it was beautiful, cold and dangerously easy to shatter if dropped. Dante didn't knock when he entered. He rarely did. She stood as soon as he appeared in the doorway, back straight, shoulders tight. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. First meeting with the foundation board. You'll be introduced as my fiancé." She nodded. "Anything else I should know?" "You'll be expected to speak about how we met. Keep it simple, charming, but not saccharine. We met at a cafe. You spilled your coffee on me. We laughed. It started from there. That's a lie, she said, tone clipped. Everything about this is, he answered, not missing a beat. Camille crossed her arms. And after all this, after 3 weeks, I just go back to cleaning floors. Dante's expression shifted for the briefest moment. After 3 weeks, you'll have no reason to. Camille didn't answer. She let the silence do what it always did between them, fill the cracks neither of them wanted to acknowledge. As he turned to leave, she called after him. Why porcelain? Dante paused, his hand on the doorframe. Because it looks delicate, he said. But it only breaks when someone stops handling it with care. And just like that, Camille accepted her role in the fiction, a no-nonsense, cold-blooded arrangement dressed in designer lies, a contract signed not with affection, but with mutual detachment. Yet as she lay down in a bed that wasn't hers, wearing a name that wasn't hers, Camille couldn't stop thinking about the weight of his gaze that morning. There was no touch, no romantic gesture, nothing outside the agreement. But something had already shifted. A tension, a recognition, an unspoken curiosity. She had agreed to be his fiancée to save her future and support her mother. That part was still true. The rules were clear. No emotion, no touch. And yet, every time she caught Dante watching her for a moment too long, she felt the rules begin to bend. The contract may have transformed her from a cleaner into a fiancée, but deep down, Camille knew she had also just become a piece in a much larger game, one she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to win. Camille adjusted the pearl button on her blouse for the 3rd time in the car, her fingers stiff, betraying nerves she hadn't felt since her final exam in macroeconomics. She had dressed carefully, nothing too extravagant, but not too plain. Understated elegance. The kind of look someone born into privilege would wear without thinking. But that was the problem. Camille was thinking. Too much. Every choice felt like a lie under construction. Dante hadn't said much on the drive to his grandmother's penthouse, aside from a clipped, "She's sharp. Don't overshare." That was it. No strategies, no coaching, no signal for when to laugh or when to stay quiet. Camille sat with her hands clenched in her lap as the elevator ascended, telling herself that this was just another role. The same way she'd pretended to be fine when dropping out of college. The same way she smiled at her mother's hospital bills and said, "We'll figure it out." But none of those performances had ever faced Lucrezia Valente, matriarch, legend, and master of unmasking. The moment Camille stepped into the dining room, she felt it, not intimidation exactly, but presence. Lucrezia didn't command the room by volume or dramatics. She didn't need to. Her power was in how she looked at people, like she could see the shelf life of their soul. She greeted Camille with 2 kisses, one on each cheek, her skin cool, her perfume subtle and old-fashioned. "So, this is the girl who made Dante human," she said. Camille smiled, unsure if it was a compliment or a trap. The dinner table was long and intimidating, and the guest list included 2 of Dante's aunts, a cousin from Milan, and Lucrezia at the head, poised like a queen surveying a chessboard. Dante played his part well, calm, attentive, affectionate in the right increments, but Lucrezia never looked at him for long. Her eyes, dark and unwavering, stayed on Camille like heat from a spotlight. Every question felt like it had 2 meanings. How did you meet? What does your family think of the engagement? And what do you admire most about Dante? Camille answered smoothly, remembering the script, coffee spill, mutual laughter, unexpected chemistry. But each lie tasted bitterer than the last. Midway through the meal, as Dante discussed the Foundation's next project with his cousin, Lucrezia leaned toward Camille. "You come from modest means," she said, not unkindly. "Yes," Camille replied. "Hard work is in your blood." "It is." Lucrezia took a sip of wine. "Then you understand value. Effort, loss." Her tone was level, but the weight in her words was unmistakable. Camille nodded. "I do." So, you also understand how dangerous a lie can be when it wears a silk dress and diamond earrings. The air left Camille's lungs for a moment. She forced a polite smile, but the pulse at her throat betrayed her. I would never lie to you, Mrs. Valente. Of course not, Cara, Lucrezia said smoothly, but be careful not to lie to yourself. And then she turned away, picking up her silverware like nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just cut through Camille's composure with surgical precision. The rest of the dinner passed in slow motion. Dante didn't seem to notice Camille's quiet unraveling, or maybe he did and chose not to address it. He kept up appearances, refilling her glass, brushing her fingers lightly under the table, whispering something in Italian that made his aunt laugh and Camille blush, though she didn't understand a word. But every time she glanced toward Lucrezia, the older woman wasn't smiling. She didn't laugh when Dante made a joke, didn't nod in approval when he spoke about company expansions. Her eyes remained neutral, as if watching a scene she'd already seen before, and knowing exactly how it ended. Camille found herself shrinking under that gaze, realizing that no couture gown, no perfectly rehearsed love story could fool someone who had built empires on reading people. It wasn't the questions that shook Camille. It was the silence between them, the kind that asked everything. At the end of the night, as coats were fetched and air kisses exchanged, Lucrezia took Camille's hand and pressed something into her palm. A necklace. Gold chain, delicate, with a small sapphire pendant. Camille looked at it, confused. It was mine, Lucrezia said, her voice soft but steady. A gift from my mother when I turned 18. I wore it the night I got engaged. Camille's breath caught. It's beautiful, she whispered. Lucrezia held her gaze for a long moment. Don't wear it if your eyes can't carry the weight. The words landed heavy, more warning than gesture. Camille nodded, fingers curling around the jewelry, unsure whether she had just been blessed or branded. Dante appeared beside her, ready to leave. He thanked his grandmother, polite but rushed, clearly eager to escape the heavy air. Camille followed him wordlessly to the elevator, the necklace cold in her palm, Lucrezia's voice echoing louder than the applause of any lie they could tell. As the car pulled away from the penthouse and the city lights blurred past the windows, Camille stared down at her lap, where the necklace now lay coiled like a silent oath. Her hands were cold, not from fear, but from knowing she had just been seen, truly seen, by someone who had lived long enough to spot a counterfeit soul in a second. Dante didn't speak until halfway across the bridge. She liked you, he said, without conviction. Camille didn't answer. Something in her had shifted. She had walked into that dinner as an actress, playing a role in a game of survival. But now, with Lucrezia's gaze burned into her thoughts and the sapphire nestled in her fingers, she didn't feel like a player anymore. She felt like a pawn that had just realized she was standing on the wrong side of the board. And beside her, Dante turned slightly, watching her with curiosity he didn't voice but fully felt, because even he could tell something had changed in her eyes. The Hamptons were never part of the plan, not hers, not his. Camille had expected 3 weeks of scheduled events, performative affection, and stiff interactions in penthouse lounges. Instead, she found herself in a sprawling beachside estate where the only sounds were the occasional buzz of Dante's phone and the quiet scratch of her pen over reports. On the first morning, she tiptoed into the kitchen at dawn, assuming he'd still be asleep. Instead, he was already at the table, black coffee in hand, suit jacket discarded over a chair, sleeves rolled up, and eyes red from what must have been a sleepless night. Their gazes met for a split second, no greeting, no nod, and then returned to their separate rhythms. She poured her own coffee and sat 5 chairs away. Neither spoke, neither needed to. In that silence, Camille understood something unspoken about him. He wasn't built for rest. This wasn't a vacation for him. It was exile with Wi-Fi. That morning, they drank their coffee side by side in silence, and when she stood to leave, Dante didn't look up. But the next day, the coffee was already poured for her when she came downstairs, and on the third day, he added cream. She hadn't told him she took it that way. Nights in the Hamptons carried a rhythm of their own, and soon Camille fell into it without resistance. After dinner, often something simple, ordered by Dante's assistant from local gourmet chefs, he would disappear into his study, phone pressed to his ear, voice low, pacing. Camille took the dining room table. She spread out reports, projections, and internal memos from the Valente Foundation, poring over them like exam prep. No one had asked her to, but numbers were her comfort zone. One night, she spotted a recurring inconsistency in a donor allocation model and scribbled notes in the margins. She didn't tell Dante. She didn't need to. The next morning, she found the updated version on the printer with her corrections implemented. No comment or thank you, just done. She wasn't sure if he appreciated it or simply expected that level of excellence from anyone in his orbit. But later that night, a hardcover book appeared outside her bedroom door, a classic economic theory text. She opened it and found a sticky note inside. Chapters 4 and 7. Useful for foundation funding models. No signature, just the angular scrawl she now recognized as his. Camille ran her thumb over the note longer than she intended to. The silent exchanges grew from rare to routine. He began leaving a new book or article summary every few days, sometimes even case studies from Harvard's archives. She marked them up and slid them back under his office door. Neither acknowledged the system, but it grew roots. One night, after Dante ended yet another exhausting call with an overseas board member, Camille walked past his office, paused, and then backed up. She knocked twice. "You missed a decimal in the Greenfield report," she said through the door. There was a pause, then the sound of papers shifting. "I didn't," came his voice. "Page 3, bottom table, asset depreciation." Another pause, then, "Shit," she smirked. "You're welcome." For a moment there was quiet again, and then, in a voice almost too low to be real, "Coffee at 6? She hesitated. "Sure." That was all. No context. No explanation. Just two people on opposite sides of a temporary arrangement, learning the weight of each other's silence. The next morning, when she entered the kitchen, he was already there, waiting, not with just coffee, but toast, buttered, no jam. She liked it that way. Neither asked how the other knew. They just sat and ate like two people who'd been doing this for years, and the quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was full of understanding, of questions neither was brave enough to ask, of the strange comfort that came from having someone see you without staring too long. Camille had never known how dangerous quiet could be, not until it started to feel like home. One morning she caught him watching her as she reread an email. "You always bite your lip when you're about to disagree with something," he said. She blinked. "And you always clench your jaw when you've already lost an argument, but won't admit it." He didn't deny it. They smiled. It was fleeting, but it was real. In that moment, the contract between them felt less like a performance and more like a scaffold, holding up something that was beginning to build itself, slowly, wordlessly. It wasn't just the mornings or the nights, it was everything in between. The way their footsteps began to sink when walking down the hallway. The way Camille started keeping her hair up because he glanced at her neck too long once. The way he added extra rice to dinner after noticing she always left the potatoes. The way he opened his office door a little wider each night. There were no kisses, no touches, just a growing familiarity that slipped between the cracks of their supposed detachment. Camille didn't know when she began to crave those silences, or when they stopped feeling awkward, but she knew one thing. The boundary she had built so carefully, the one Dante had promised to respect, was beginning to crack. Not because of words or even glances, but because in their quiet, something tender had begun to bloom. Not love, not yet, but the terrible, dangerous awareness that love might want to grow there if they weren't careful. And that awareness changed everything. It made the air heavier, the pauses longer, the eye contact slower to break. Camille felt it in the way she lingered a second too long at the kitchen counter after breakfast. Dante felt it in the way his fingers hovered over his phone before cancelling a call. They said nothing, they did nothing, but they felt everything. The contract still stood, the terms were still in place. But every quiet coffee, every marginal note, every book passed in the hallway said otherwise. What had started as silence born of distance had become a bridge neither of them dared to name. And in that fragile space between avoidance and acknowledgement, Camille felt the first crack run through the wall she'd built. A tiny, imperceptible fracture, but enough to know it wouldn't hold forever. Nathan Blackwell never believed Dante Valente had a heart until rumors of a fiancée surfaced, a private, academic, soft-spoken woman from nowhere. That didn't fit the profile of the cold, calculated man Nathan had competed with on every boardroom battlefield for the past decade. Dante had always been 3 moves ahead, but this move felt sloppy, sentimental, and that made it exploitable. Nathan started with a background check, expecting little more than a typical social climber. What he found was far more interesting. Camille Dawson, age 26. No social media footprint, no prestigious family name, no debutante appearances. Just a modest scholarship to UNC, dropped out 2 years before graduation. Father, deceased. Mother, alive, terminal illness, currently in a care facility in South Carolina. Current address prior to moving into the Valente estate, a cramped apartment above a laundromat in Queens. Nathan leaned back in his chair, smirking. Gold. This wasn't a woman who belonged in high society. She was surviving, not thriving. And that made her the perfect pressure point to snap Dante in half. After all, what better way to ruin a man who built his empire on precision than to show the world that he'd been emotionally compromised by a maid? Camille noticed the shift the next morning. It was subtle, a call that didn't come through from her mother's clinic, a strange car parked too long outside the gates, a social worker who called to confirm Camille Dawson's current employment. The unease built slowly like a shadow stretching over her spine. She said nothing to Dante, not yet. Instead, she dug into the back end of the Valente Foundation's internal system, one she now had partial access to, and found something chilling. A flagged inquiry from a third party about her scholarship history. The IP address led back to a law firm Dante had mentioned only once, in passing, as being affiliated with Nathan Blackwell. That was when the air left her lungs. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was digging, hard, and not because they cared about her credentials. They were looking for cracks, weaknesses, truths that had been carefully hidden under layers of dignity. Camille closed her laptop and stared at her reflection in the black screen. This had stopped being a harmless game of make-believe. There were consequences now. And if Nathan kept going, he wouldn't just take Dante down, he'd destroy her too, her mother's care, her education, everything. That night, Dante found her in the study, sitting perfectly still, hands clenched, jaw tight. "What's wrong?" he asked. She hesitated, then held out her phone with the flagged activity. "Your friend Nathan is sniffing around." Dante took the phone and scanned the screen, eyes narrowing. "How long have you known?" 2 days. He looked up sharply. "And you didn't tell me?" "I wanted to be sure." She stood, restless. "Now I am." There was silence for a beat. Then he cursed under his breath and threw the phone onto the couch. He's trying to build a case. Discredit the engagement, paint it as a fraud, trigger a clause in the will. Typical. Camille folded her arms. "He's using me." "He's using us," Dante corrected. "You're just easier to target." The words stung. Not because they weren't true, but because she'd felt it already. So what happens now? Oh, she asked quieter. Dante's voice dropped. Now we don't blink. Not once. But Camille wasn't sure how to do that. Not when every inch of her life was being peeled back and turned into ammunition. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, thoughts unraveling in loops. The contract had rules, clean lines, boundaries. It had been safe in its own strange way. Now it felt like a glass house with a sniper watching from the outside. She thought of her mother, how much Camille had sacrificed just to keep her breathing, comfortable, safe. One phone call from someone like Nathan and that safety could evaporate. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about trust, about dignity, about survival. Camille had worked too hard for too long to have it all burned down because of someone else's war. And yet, the weight in her chest didn't come only from fear for herself. It came from something deeper, something she didn't want to name. She was afraid for Dante. And not because he could lose everything, but because for the first time, it mattered to her if he did. His downfall would no longer be collateral damage. It would be personal, and that terrified her more than anything Nathan Blackwell could uncover. The next morning she said nothing about her sleepless night. Dante didn't ask, but something had shifted between them. He paused before leaving the kitchen. "You trust me to handle this?" Camille didn't answer right away. Then she nodded. "But I want full visibility going forward. I won't be the last to know when it's my life on the line." He studied her, then gave a single nod. "Fair." She picked up her tablet, trying to focus on the donor breakdown spreadsheet in front of her, but the numbers blurred. She couldn't stop thinking about how fast the ground beneath them was cracking. For all their rules, all their distance, the line between performance and reality had blurred in ways neither of them had anticipated. This wasn't about pretending anymore. This was about protection. Camille felt it in her bones. The contract hadn't just turned her into Dante's fiancée. It had turned her into a liability, a target, and somewhere along the way into something far more dangerous, someone he might actually want to protect. And for the first time, Camille wasn't afraid of being exposed. She was afraid of what Nathan would do to Dante if he succeeded. That fear made everything real. The contract, the looks, the silences, the gestures. Camille sat back, closed her eyes for a moment, and exhaled slowly. The deal had changed, whether either of them admitted it or not. Now it wasn't about money, it wasn't about a degree, it was about safety, about loyalty, about navigating a battlefield they hadn't chosen. And as she opened her eyes again and returned to her work, she did so with a single truth pulsing beneath her skin. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was war, and the risk wasn't just hers. It was theirs. The rehearsal was supposed to be simple, in and out. Say the lines, smile for the board, dance to no music, leave with no mess. But when Dante stepped onto the stage in the private auditorium rented for the Valente Foundation's gala prep, everything in him bristled. Camille was already standing there, reviewing the rundown with one of the event coordinators. She wore a navy blazer over a silk blouse, her hair pinned with quiet precision. She looked like someone born to speak in front of investors. But her eyes darted toward him the moment he walked in, and they held something sharper than nerves. "You're late," she said. Not accusing, just stating a fact. "I know," Dante replied, adjusting his cufflinks, as if that could deflect the storm inside him. "Let's get this over with." The coordinator cleared her throat. "When we cue the toast, you'll turn toward her, raise your glass, then go in for the kiss. Nothing too passionate, just enough to read genuine. The shareholders will be watching for chemistry." Camille's hand tightened around her note cards. Dante noticed. She didn't need to say a word. He already knew they were about to cross a line that could not be undone. As the countdown began and they took their places near the podium, the space between them shrank into something unbearable. Dante could feel Camille's tension, even though she stood inches away without looking at him. The last time he'd kissed someone in public, it had been for convenience, publicity, or damage control. But this wasn't real, and yet his chest clenched like it was. 3, 2, the coordinator called out. Camille turned her face toward him on cue, and their eyes locked, really locked, for the first time in days. No forced smile, no boardroom mask, just the quiet truth of two people about to lie with their mouths and tell the truth with their eyes. Dante leaned in. Her breath caught. His hand grazed the back of her neck like muscle memory, and then his lips met hers. The kiss was supposed to last 2 seconds, maybe 3, just a brush. But her hand found his lapel, and his fingers flexed against her spine, and suddenly neither of them moved. Their lips stayed connected longer than rehearsed, not deep but lingering, trembled, like a question being asked in a language neither of them knew how to speak. When they finally broke apart, Camille looked dazed, not because of the kiss itself, but because of everything it implied. She blinked once, twice, then slowly turned back toward the coordinator as if on autopilot. "That work?" she asked, voice tight. The coordinator was already checking something off her clipboard, completely unaware of the emotional detonator that had just gone off. Dante didn't say a word. He couldn't. He stood there, watching Camille recompose herself, watching the way she adjusted her blazer like armor. But something in him had fractured, and he wasn't sure how to stitch it back together. He hadn't just kissed an employee. He hadn't just kissed a contractually obligated fake fiancée. He'd kissed a woman he'd come to rely on, trust, want. And the terrifying part was, she had kissed him back. Not as part of the script, but with something unspoken, almost afraid, underneath. He'd felt it in the way her breath trembled, in the second she hesitated before letting go. In that kiss, the lie they had both built became the most honest thing they had. Camille didn't confront him. She didn't ask what it meant. That was worse. She walked off stage and went straight to her things, her movements efficient, controlled, quiet. But she avoided his gaze, and that silence spoke louder than any confrontation. Dante followed her out of the rehearsal room, but the hallway between them felt like a chasm. "Camille," he said softly. She paused, hand on the strap of her bag. "It was just a kiss, Dante. We were told to do it." Her voice wasn't angry. It was careful, measured, like someone who had felt something they weren't ready to unpack. He nodded slowly. "Right, just part of the show." She turned back around and walked away, but Dante didn't move. He stood there, the echo of her lips still on his, wondering how a man could be surrounded by power, wealth, and strategy, and still feel completely unprepared for one unscripted moment that had rewritten the rules. Later that night, neither of them mentioned the kiss. They had dinner at opposite ends of the dining table, discussing logistics and timelines with robotic detachment. But in between words like caterer and donor list, their eyes would drift, linger, pull away again like hands afraid to touch a flame twice. Camille excused herself early, claiming a call from her mother's nurse. Dante nodded, pretending not to watch her leave. The moment the door closed behind her, he exhaled deeply and leaned back in his chair. That kiss hadn't been in the contract. That wasn't a business arrangement. That was a crack in the armor, a leak in the dam. Something real had slipped through. And now all he could do was wait and wonder if Camille felt it too, or if she'd lock that truth away before either of them could name it. The next morning came with rehearsals and new agendas, but something in the air between them had changed. Neither mentioned the kiss, neither dared to. But the silence had lost its neutrality. It was no longer the quiet of strangers or co-conspirators. It was the silence of people who had tasted something real and didn't know how to go back to pretending. Camille brushed past him in the hallway, murmuring something about scripts and timing, and Dante caught the faintest tremor in her voice. She had felt it too. He was sure of it. And that realization made the entire foundation of their agreement feel thinner than ever. What was once solid and contractual now felt fragile, breakable, like porcelain. The moment Camille stepped through the ballroom doors in that navy blue gown, time slowed. It wasn't just the way the fabric hugged her frame or how her hair was swept back to reveal the delicate line of her neck. It was the way she walked, composed, quietly radiant, as if she had come not to perform, but to confront. Dante had been speaking with a group of board members when his eyes caught hers across the room, and whatever words had been in his mouth died right there. For a moment, all the noise faded, and there was only her. Camille didn't smile. She didn't wave. She didn't need to. Her presence said everything. Nathan Blackwell stood near the stage with a look of cruel satisfaction. His fingers curled tightly around the folder that contained the supposed truth. Camille saw it. She had known this moment was coming. She had rehearsed what she'd say in front of mirrors, behind locked doors, and in the corners of her mind at night. But nothing prepared her for how heavy her chest would feel when she saw Dante's expression, confused, worried, and just beneath that, afraid. And still, she kept walking because this was the only way. The gala had reached its peak, and Lucrezia Valente herself took the stage to thank the donors, the families, and the shareholders. Her words were elegant, gracious, and when she turned to Camille and Dante, her beloved grandson and his fiancée, there was pride in her voice. That was when Nathan moved. He stepped forward, clearing his throat, interrupting the applause. "Before we continue," he said, voice sharp as glass, "I believe there's something important the board deserves to know." Camille's fingers tightened around her champagne flute. She saw the moment Dante realized what was happening. His hand twitched at his side, his jaw locking. Nathan lifted the folder slowly, theatrically. "This woman," he said, holding it up, "is not who she claims to be." Dante took a step forward, but Camille beat him to it. She moved swiftly to the stage and reached for the microphone. Her voice didn't shake. "He's right," she said. The room fell silent in a single breath. "I'm not who you think I am. At least, I wasn't when this started." Lucrezia's brows furrowed. Dante froze, and Camille closed her eyes for a heartbeat before opening them again to face the room and the man who mattered most. "When Dante and I agreed to this arrangement, it was a contract," Camille said, her voice steady but full of unspoken weight. "A business deal. I was the housekeeper, a student struggling to pay for school, and he needed to fulfill a requirement in his grandmother's will. We were not in love. We were not a couple. We were pretending." The words rang like sirens in a crowd that didn't dare speak. "But somewhere in the middle of pretending," she continued, her voice quieter now, "something changed. I didn't plan it, I didn't expect it, but I fell in love with him." Her eyes moved to Dante, softening for just a moment. Not the name, not the empire, not the version he shows to boardrooms. "I fell for the man who leaves books at my door and remembers how I take my coffee. The one who doesn't know how to say he cares, but shows it anyway in ways he doesn't think anyone notices." Her voice cracked, barely. "If this ruins me, so be it. If I lose everything I hope to build, at least I won't lose myself. Because I'd rather walk out of here with nothing than keep living a lie that no longer feels like one." There was a beat of nothing, just stillness, then another, and another. Camille stared out at the stunned crowd, eyes unblinking, heart pounding like it might shatter through her ribs. Nathan, for once, looked caught off guard. He hadn't expected this. No one had. She could feel the judgment crawling across the room, but worse than that, she felt the silence coming from Dante. No movement, no reaction, no voice cutting through the quiet to reach her. It felt like a free-fall, a sharp wind of uncertainty whipping through her as she lowered the microphone and stepped back from the stage. This was it. The moment where everything she feared would happen, did. And then, just when she thought the silence would crush her, she heard footsteps. Firm, determined, Dante was crossing the stage. He didn't hesitate, he didn't stop. He took her by the waist, pulled her against him, and kissed her right there in front of everyone. It wasn't polite or careful. It wasn't a kiss for show or strategy. It was raw, unfiltered. A vote cast with lips instead of words. The kind of kiss that unraveled everything fake and exposed everything real. Camille's breath caught, her fingers gripping the lapel of his suit like it was the only thing anchoring her. And for the first time since this all began, there was no script, no contract, no performance, just truth, poured into one kiss that made the whole ballroom vanish. When Dante finally pulled away, he didn't turn to the crowd. He looked straight at Nathan, his voice low but unshakable. This woman saved my company. She saved my family. And if any of you think I'd let her walk away after that, you don't know me at all. The board didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just watched, stunned into silence, as Dante slipped his hand into Camille's and held it like a vow. The lights of the ballroom dimmed a little as the next act was cued, but none of it mattered. Not to Camille, not to Dante, not anymore. The weight in her chest didn't feel like fear now. It felt like release. She had said everything, risked everything. And still, she stood. Still, she was held. Lucretia gave her a single nod from the front row, and it was more powerful than any speech. Camille looked up at Dante, who hadn't stopped looking at her. There was no triumph in his eyes, no pride, just something open, unguarded, and quiet. A silent promise. They didn't need applause. They didn't need approval, because in that one moment, surrounded by board members, enemies, and ghosts of the lie they once told, they both knew the same truth. Nothing about this was fake anymore. Camille leaned into his side, and Dante held her closer. The kiss had been more than an answer. It had been a choice, a vote, a vow. The morning after the gala did not rise gently. It hit like a verdict. Camille awoke unsure of what reality she had stepped into. Was she still just the girl who once scrubbed the corners of Valenti marble floors? Or had she truly become the woman who stood before a sea of shareholders and chose truth over protection? She didn't have much time to process it. The moment she entered the drawing room, Lucrezia was already waiting. The matriarch didn't speak at first, just lifted her chin with that ever-calculated grace, and nodded, as if acknowledging that Camille had passed some unspeakable test. "You didn't blink," Lucrezia said. "Not even when it would have been easier to lie." Camille didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded back. A quiet understanding passed between them. Then came the board meeting, an emergency session. Dante, with all the calm of a man who had nothing left to hide, handed over Nathan's compiled threats, blackmail attempts, and breach of code conduct to the legal team. Nathan didn't deny it. He just glared at Camille one last time, like she was the stone that ruined his slingshot. "You made a mistake," he muttered, but the board disagreed. They expelled him unanimously. Outside, after the storm had passed and the crowd had dispersed, Dante found Camille standing alone near the reflecting pool. Her arms were crossed, but not defensively, more like she was holding herself together as everything around her shifted into something unrecognizable. She didn't notice his approach until his shadow brushed hers. "That wasn't how I expected last night to go," he murmured, voice lower than usual. She turned, meeting his eyes, still sharp, still unreadable, but softer now in ways words couldn't explain. "Me neither," she replied. "But I meant it. Every word." Dante stepped closer, hands in his pockets, almost like he was nervous. It was rare seeing him like that. "I used to think emotions were a liability," he said. That getting close to anyone was a distraction, something I couldn't afford. But then you came into my life and started rearranging my spreadsheets, my company, my mornings, my entire thinking, and I don't want to go back to the way it was before you." Camille felt her heart tremble beneath her ribs. "Is this another contract?" she whispered, half teasing. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, opened it, and said with the most unpolished honesty he'd ever spoken, "No clauses, no conditions, just a question. Will you marry me? For real this time?" 1 year later, the numbers told a different story. Valente Enterprises had undergone a transformation, not just cosmetic but structural. Under Camille's leadership as CFO, they launched 3 educational initiatives, including a scholarship fund for underprivileged students studying finance and economics. The same board that once questioned her now applauded her. Her spreadsheets had become blueprints for opportunity. She remembered the weight of the first time she had run a full executive meeting, the way her hands had trembled slightly beneath the table as she explained a strategy she'd stayed up all night modeling. Dante had sat beside her, not leading, not correcting, just listening, trusting. And when the meeting ended, he hadn't said good job or offered empty praise. He'd simply squeezed her hand once under the table and whispered, "You owned that room." That was enough. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but it was honest. They fought about numbers, about deadlines, about who left wet towels on the bed. But they also danced barefoot in the kitchen, argued over which pizza place was superior, and made a habit of undoing the weight of the day with quiet, shared rituals. Camille reading finance journals on the couch while Dante made late-night tea, usually pretending not to have burned the water. Dante didn't change overnight. He was still brutal in negotiations, still the sharpest mind in any room he walked into, and still allergic to small talk. But Camille knew how to navigate him now. When he came home worn down and withdrawn, she didn't flood him with questions. She just sat beside him, close enough that their silence became a conversation. And he, in turn, had learned to see her not just as the woman who had saved his company, but as the partner who made him want to be better. Slowly, awkwardly, he had begun to smile, truly smile, especially when she wasn't looking. She found sticky notes from him in her desk drawer, notes that said things like, "You were right about the liquidity ratio," or "Stop working, come to bed." Once, when she caught a cold and tried to push through a board meeting, Dante cancelled it without blinking. "You're not a machine," he told her. "Not on my watch." That night, he brought her soup and read emails aloud in dramatic voices just to make her laugh. They were still Dante and Camille, just versions of themselves neither had known they could become. Not perfect, but real. Real had always been enough. Every Friday evening, when the last meeting had ended and the emails had been ignored long enough, Camille would return to the one place no one else dared disturb, the old library. It hadn't changed much. Still the same towering shelves, still the same creaky chair by the window, still that one marble floor tile she had scrubbed on the day everything began. She didn't come there to clean anymore, but some habits lingered. Sometimes she brought a cloth and wiped down a dusty corner, not because it needed it, but because she liked remembering. The quiet, the decision, the risk she took with a formula correction and a borrowed keyboard. That marble, once cold and impersonal, had become something sacred. It reminded her of who she had been, scared, overlooked, unseen, and who she had chosen to become. Camille Valente, wife, CFO, daughter, dreamer. Her hands had once been calloused from bleach and rags. Now they signed off on 7-figure proposals. But to her, the weight of a pen had never matched the weight of that first choice, to rewrite the rules instead of obey them. And the library? It remained her favorite room, not because of what she found there, but because of what she built. It was a quiet afternoon when she found herself kneeling again, cloth in hand, at that same spot on the marble floor. She didn't know why. Nostalgia, maybe, or ritual. But as she smoothed the cloth over the tile, she smiled. Not the smile of a woman remembering a struggle, but of one honoring a beginning. Behind her, Dante appeared in the doorway, leaning silently as he watched her. "You know we have people for that now," he said, voice amused. She glanced back at him with a smirk. "I know," she said. "But they weren't here that day." He walked over and crouched beside her, not saying anything for a long moment. Then he whispered, "This was where I saw you for the first time. Not just noticed you, saw you." Camille placed the cloth aside. "And I saw me," she murmured. "Maybe for the first time too." They stayed there side by side, the marble cool beneath them, the past folded neatly into the present. That moment, simple and unglamorous, felt like the true ending of a contract that had never really fit. Not because it was broken, but because it had evolved. Porcelain had cracked, and in its place something far more durable had formed. We put a lot of heart and care into crafting each one of these stories, always thinking of you who watch, reflect, and feel along with us. If this story moved you in any way, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support truly helps us keep bringing more meaningful content like this to life, and we'd love to hear from you. What part of this story touched you the most? Leave us a comment and take a moment to explore our other videos too. Each view, each message means the world to us. Thank you for being here with us. See you in the next story.